Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to another episode of Beyond This. I'm your host, Zaheerah, Bham, Ismail. While we unpack discussions rather than decisions, the topics always vary around things that are pertinent to us, but not just about discussions. It's also about what do we do with it? How do we take it forward? So the slip up about saying it's decisions also fits in, because it's making those decisions to do the right thing, to move forward, to do the hard work, to dig deep, and to also make things better for yourself, because you really do owe it to yourself. Today in my studio with me is a dear friend of mine, Naeera Abed, who is also an advanced trauma release facilitator. Naeera, assalamu alaikum and welcome to the studios.
Walaikum salam. Thanks for having me.
I think always a pleasure to be sharing this platform with you. I've watched you grow in this space so tremendously, but you also offer so many safe spaces to people around you. And I think that in itself is such a gift, because we often mistake how difficult this journey is and how many people rely on needing support. Because it's one thing to say, I want to do this work, but I think it also needs to be a guided journey, because you can get so lost because everything becomes so overwhelming at some point.
So I think what you said is very relevant, that it's a gift. It's an absolute gift to be able to provide that safety for people around me. So that's the way I see it. And with each and every person that I deal with, I look at it that way, that it's an absolute gift.
Alhamdulillah. I think we've discussed before where I said to you, and I think we've discussed it on one of the shows previously as well, that when you get into your 40s, there is an awakening, and there has to be an understanding of the fact that there's toxicity within each of us. These days, it's so easy to label everyone in every relationship, oh, this person's a narcissist, that person has toxicity. But the truth of it is, every single one of us has it. And depending on the relationships we're in, there are different parts of us that come out, yes. Which is true, right? Because it's not all good, it's not all bad, absolutely. But there's different parts of us. I want to discuss the navigation around identifying our own toxicity within ourselves and taking responsibility for sorting and fixing that for ourselves.
Okay, so I think what's very important here is that recognizing our own toxicity is not always easy. It's not always, so we get into patterns of behavior that we actually think are normal. It's actually the survival instinct that kicks in. And we have all these hidden experiences in our life that sit in our nervous system. And with those hidden experiences, it almost, because we don't know about them, we find it very difficult to recognize ourselves or anyone else as being toxic. So the most important thing to understand is that it's not always an easy task to recognize that what we're doing is toxic.
So how do we get to that part of recognizing it? Because if it's always everyone else's problem, I've sat and we hear talks where people go, this person's a problem, that person's a problem, this person's hurt me, that person's done this. And eventually you have to say, it can't always just be everybody else.
Yes.
We also have a part to play in our journey, and we have to take responsibility for that. And if we don't do it now, at which point do we do it? Because my logic is, if we don't end up doing it, we just cause generational trauma, because we stay and we become these people that blame everyone else. We always the victim. Everything happens to us. We take no responsibility in the parts that we play, and we just shirk that off to everyone else.
So I think the most important thing to realize here is that identifying them is not the most important thing. It's not what helps. So if you can, most people can identify that I'm being toxic. It's I know that I'm behaving in this way. I know what I'm doing to the people around me, but what do I do about it? And that's where everybody gets stuck.
So I'm smiling because all I'm thinking about is, I know during fights with spouses, we go, oh, we know we should keep quiet, we've lost this, but we don't even know how to stop. Yeah. We're already rolling with it.
So most of us can identify it, and most of us have done some sort of traditional mind-based therapy, which is great. That'll help us to identify where we're going wrong. So a lot of people will come to me saying, I've been for therapy, and I know that what I'm doing is wrong. I know what I'm doing to the people around me, but I don't know how to resolve it.
So how do we end up resolving it?
The secret is, first, to shift the idea that regulation is a conscious decision. So traditional mind-based therapy, which is great, is also a conscious decision. And regulation is very, I'm going to say, subconscious or autonomic, right? And the main thing about shifting that idea is that regulation requires safety. And we're all walking around in a world where there is absolutely no safety. Safety is the key to this. we need to be able to feel safe within ourselves so that we can access that part of our nervous systems or that part of the memory where these stored experiences are. Stored experiences are sitting in the nervous system and we're walking around with them. When we do, we become these type of people with these patterns of behavior. It's actually called the personality of trauma. It's us walking around with all these experiences that show out in our behavior. So the secret is to get to a subconscious level, to get to a level of what have I experienced. The brain is smart. It's going to force you to forget these experiences. And most of us either don't recall them or we've chosen to forget them. But it's getting to these places in our nervous system that is going to help you to change behaviors. And that's always safety. Safety is the most important element. And it forces me to ask, are we creating that safe space in our lives as well? Besides the fact that we have these toxic behaviors, are we creating a safe space for our kids?
So there's a few things that you mentioned just now in terms of the trauma that we carry around with us, because as much as many of us are part of that process where we just don't want to deal with it, it's too much to deal with, we want to sweep it under the carpet and just keep busy and keep moving forward. The truth of it is, as you're saying, our body actually stores that, and it's going to come up at the most inopportune time. It's going to come up in ways that are not healthy or regulated.
Absolutely. So that's actually what I do, is to look from a bottoms up approach. Where is this stored in my body and how is it coming up in my behavior? How is it affecting the people around me? Because that's ultimately what it does. So something happened years and years ago. It's stored in my body, the experience of it. And because of that experience, it's now affecting the people around me. And not being able to have that space where we just had this chat earlier, that people need a safe space to be able to bring up what they've experienced. They need to go from a body level up to a conscious level. And that's where behaviors start to shift. That's where things start to change.
So let's talk about these safe spaces. For me, that's important because so often as women especially, we don't even create this for ourselves. We literally on this roller coaster, just pushing forward constantly. And we don't even think about putting these safe spaces for ourselves to regulate our nervous system. And like you said, the implications of that falls over in how we parent, how we have relationships with siblings, with parents, with friends, with everyone around us.
And that's very important, Zaheerah. What are we pushing towards? If we can't live in this moment, if we can't, when you walk into a room, are you creating a safe space for the people around you? Are you co-regulating with people around you? Your kids, your family, your husband, your friends. Are you creating such a space that they know they're okay? It's so important with kids. Are we creating a world where they need to just be a certain type of people? Are we creating a world where they need to be a success, and how are we defining that success? Our homes, are we creating the kind of home where the kids are running away from us, or that they're running towards us when things get difficult? That's what we need to ask ourselves. And in order to do that, we have to take responsibility for where our nervous systems are functioning. It's a very good example. It's pretty simple. When you walk into a room, you either get that one person that everybody's drawn to and everybody feels safe around that person. You almost would cry in front of that person, or say, if they ask you, how are you feeling? Instead of saying, I'm okay, you'd say, I had a really rough week, and it just sort of comes out. That's the definition of safety. Or you could walk into the room and somebody could make you feel so unsafe that you're pretending to be something that you are not. And let's be honest, at 40, who wants to pretend anymore?
Absolutely.
You absolutely do not want to pretend.
And you don't want to be walking out of situations, or actually even putting yourself in situations where you're not true to yourself. If you're walking out of a lunch, a tea, any event that you're at, and you feel depleted, empty, you feel like you're lacking in something, those are not the settings that you need to be putting yourself into. Those are not your safe spaces.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought it out. I noticed there's one thing that absolutely drains everybody, not only me, is that it's the toxicity of running people down in their absence. It's a very big topic. If you walk into a room where everybody is pushing each other to be better, there's so many topics that you can talk about. How can we become better? Who was I yesterday and who am I going to be tomorrow? That should take up enough time.
Absolutely. And for me is you can't talk about friendships, but you're running down the same people on a different platforms to try and make yourself feel better or look better. For me, rightly, as you said, it's toxicity. But for me, when I hear people talking, it's always a reflection of who they are rather 100%. Than about the other person. Because for me, I've learned the hard way, many lessons, that don't trust what someone else says about a person. You've got to engage yourself to be able to make a decision about what that person is. And that person may be good in certain circumstances, but just like us has toxicity in different circumstances based on situations. But this habit of thinking it's absolutely okay to sit at events, talk about other people's lives, talk about people, running them down, you're literally putting yourself in a depleting situation.
If you're honest to yourself, you'll realize that it drains you, firstly. When I walk out of situations like that, where it's always discussing other people, I feel absolutely drained. And I feel very uplifted when we're talking about ourselves and our mistakes. So there's actually a lot of healing in that. Admit to yourself, take accountability for what you're doing. If I think I mentioned this to you, Zaheerah. My daughter taught me such a beautiful lesson. Yes. I mentioned something about somebody else that I had heard, and she said to me, Mom, I'm going to defend that person. And the reason is they're not here to defend themselves.
I loved that.
It was absolutely beautiful. It taught me that be conscious about the person who's not there that's being discussed. What you say now can be passed on in a different way to the next person. And the story could absolutely change by the end of it.
And it devastates families. It devastates people around you. And you have no idea of the long-term consequences. So those things of saying, oh, but I'm not saying anything, I'm just saying. Actually, the just saying, we have to, and we've discussed this previously also about how conscious we need to be of the words that we use, the impact of it, the effects of it. And you have to take responsibility.
Absolutely.
But just to come back to how we spoke about being at those tables where you have a winning mindset, a growth mindset. And we have so many people around us where we sit at those tables and you actually leave there feeling uplifted. You feel better. You have women around who cheer you on, who want to see you winning, who understand completely that what's written for you is yours. And nothing will change from that. So it's easy to support women in those environments. So how do we end up creating those safe spaces, not just for ourselves, but for our children to be part of as well?
So those safe spaces, it's not a conscious decision. You have to get within yourself and see how you feel around certain people. When you're 40, you actually almost cannot be in those surroundings anymore. They just don't resonate with you. And if you can become in touch with your own body and how you feel, for example, with regard to triggers or being toxic, in that moment, how am I feeling within myself? What is bringing this up? What is making me feel that way? And what is the actual response in my body? Am I feeling heightened? Am I feeling discomfort? Am I feeling any sort of pain or tightness anywhere? And identifying it in your body will then have a ripple effect to your nervous system.
But that's also being very self-aware, right? So we have to be comfortable to be aware of ourselves enough to be able to deal with this.
But don't we get to that at 40?
I hope so. I think I'm definitely there. But I think it's also, I wonder if we do, or because I think at some point you have to be saying, I can't keep doing things out of obligations. I can't be sitting at these tables out of obligations. It has to be real. It has to be authentic. It has to resonate with you. You will know when somebody is talking to you, when they're reaching out to you, when it feels real, it feels sincere. And when you feel like it's just, you're a number.
Becoming true to how you feel is one aspect, but the other aspect is being honest. Instead of going to everybody else about how this person made you feel, go to that person. I value the relationships with people who came to me and said, Naeera, is this true? Did you say this about me? And is this how you feel about me? And I've been given that opportunity to clear that up.
That's brilliant.
And those are the relationships that have lasted.
And the thing is that majority of the time it's miscommunication, and it's things that can be fixed that we often just go, I'm not dealing with it. And I think we're all guilty of that. I'm guilty of it as well, thinking I don't need to prove anything.
Absolutely. And I think if you start living your life realizing that there's a divine plan, and that plan has absolutely no mistakes in it. If you realize that, you will realize that what your responsibility is to do the best you can now. It's not to worry about down the line and how you're going to be and who you're going to turn out to be, because you're losing now. And that's more important, to become grounded, to self-regulate and to understand that now is all that matters. Giving your best in the moment. There is another aspect to this, is how we allow toxicity into our lives. And somebody said this to me last week, which was so interesting. Somebody I've worked with, and she said in the past, she embraced toxicity knowing that it's not good for her. So you know what? You're absolutely bad for me, but please come. Let me embrace you with open arms. And learning regulation, building a capacity to self-regulate, has taught her that you're not good for me. You're going to stay where you are. And that's the shift you feel in your nervous system when you deal with the past. At the same time, the person bringing the toxicity into your life is not going to like that you set these boundaries. And that's another important aspect. To know that you're not doing anything wrong. You're setting a boundary that is important to not allow this toxicity into your life. That person's almost going to be like, why aren't you reacting the way I want you to react? But that's within them. That's their healing. You need to take responsibility for yourself, because ultimately everything you experience, you're going to bring onto your kids. And as I said, you want to be the kind of place where your kids run to you when the world gets difficult, not the kind of place that your kids are aiming to run away from.
And when we talk about relationships, when the Quran talks about marriage, it talks about exactly that, a place of peace. And that's what home is supposed to be, where people want to be there, they want to feel safe. And I think that concept of being safe is so integral for all of us, not just for our individual selves, but for our homes, that our kids know it's coming
Understanding that safety in itself is a release mechanism. Because everything that you're holding on to, if you are safe, a lot of people will come into my rooms and at the end of the session, they'll ask me, what did you do? How did this all come out? It's just providing a safe space to let somebody know that it's okay to take it out. We are living in a world where we're putting ourselves under so much pressure. The pressure needs to stop. If we realize that we need to raise people that will bring goodness, you and I spoke about it earlier, that we're posting everything about what's going on around the world. But do we realize that the responsibility to those people that are suffering is to change ourselves? It starts with that one person. That one person who makes a conscious decision to be better tomorrow is bringing goodness.
Absolutely.
That's our responsibility. We're helpless right now. We can't help anybody else that's suffering. But we need to understand that we play such an important role by just dealing with ourselves first.
So you mentioned quite a few things, and I just want to touch back on that. I completely agree with you about taking personal responsibility and what are we putting out there. And I think the one thing that we have to be firm about, and it comes back to our discussions again about relationships, is people need to be safe on your lips. That if somebody has come to you, they've confided in you, they've come to vent to you, you need to accept that it's just a venting that is required for that moment, and it needs to stay there. It shouldn't be made bigger. It shouldn't be taken out of context. It shouldn't be passed on to anyone else. It needs to be there. And also, when you're sitting at tables, just don't discuss people. Always find something good to say about that person, because there is something good that you can say. And always try and reflect it, the conversation, deflect the conversation. That if somebody is saying something negative, find the goodness in that person, put that into the conversation and end the conversation immediately.
Exactly.
You also brought up boundaries, which I think is another whole episode that we need to discuss on how we actually establish good, healthy boundaries. Because people think boundaries are, I cut everybody out and I put these walls around myself and it's only me, and only me. And I think it's not that, and we have to have that discussion.
Not. I think, but with boundaries, people who need to cut everybody out and stay on their own, that for me is a coping mechanism of trauma. That's one of the behaviors that we need to shift, and we need to shift that by dealing with whatever we've experienced. I think it's very important to understand that how good you feel when you put other people up. How good, give yourself a moment to see how good it feels that someone could trust you and then it stayed there. It's absolutely liberating in its own. It nurtures the soul.
And that thing, you don't have to tell people you were the first to know. When you protect someone, the blessings and the ripple effects of that are huge. You can feel it around you, and people understand that you become that safe zone. So I know we started off with recognizing our own toxicity, but it also we knew we weren't going to. And this is the problem with Naeera, is the conversation just flows to a million other things, and we will get it back on to discuss a few more things. But very quickly, we started off with recognizing our own toxicity, but in that, creating safe spaces. how do we start? Where do we go from here? I know we discussed it briefly in bits and pieces throughout the show, but just a summary thing of how do we start this process for ourselves?
Okay, so I would suggest a bottoms-up approach, starting with the body, recognizing events that have happened and how it makes you feel in the body. Not really the story and not really from a conscious perspective, but working with the fascia in the body to try and release those stored experiences. Creating then a safety in the nervous system. And I think once you build a regulatory capacity, it's a beautiful entry into the nervous system. The brainstem is designed for survival, so it's going to react to things around us. But once you have a regulatory capacity, so any form of treatment or any person that makes you feel like you can build that regulation is going to be good for you. There's no hard and fast rule. I use many different techniques myself. But I think it starts with a bottoms-up approach, is recognizing how it's making you feel, working with that and getting into the nervous system from there.
And I know we're almost out of time, but I have to ask this. How do we recognize when we need the different types of help, when we need to see a psychologist, when we need to see a counselor, a guide, a healer, a trauma release facilitator? I think there's so many things available for healing. How do you know, or how do you get to figure out which one would work for you, or when is it time to refer on, or when is it time to actually say, I can't do this on my own, I need the help?
So that's a very interesting topic, and I think it'll need a lot of time.
A whole show for that.
But what I'm going to say on that is everybody deals with it differently. My advice and my perspective is that it starts with a bit of body work and recognizing these old traumas that have been sitting in the nervous system for a long time. Once they come up, at that point, you could turn to traditional mind-based therapy, psychology, that sort of thing, which will help you to process through those things. I always wonder, how do you process through something that you don't know is there? So you start with bringing it up to the surface, find a safe space or treatment that works for you, that resonates with you. You don't need to be doing everything that's trending. I absolutely do not believe in things that are trending. I believe that there's ancient techniques. There is certain things that work and have worked for generations. And those type of things are where you start. If you go to the right person, they'll know when to refer you on. They'll know that it's time to deal with the story more than the subconscious mind. But it starts with bringing up something that you don't even know is there. And that needs safety.
Fantastic. Naeera, always a pleasure to share the platform with you. I've no doubt you'll be on many other episodes guiding us through many discussions. So how do we recognize our own toxicity? Let's start with creating safe spaces, not just for ourselves, but to understand that the ripple effects of that are far-reaching, and we want to create a better space for people around us, because like Naeera said, we can't change the whole world, but we can definitely start with changing ourselves. Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of Beyond This, because what comes next starts here.